This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with part 2 of our remembrance of the life and legacy of David McReynolds, longtime pacifist and socialist, whom historian Howard Zinn and many others have called a hero of the anti-war movement. David McReynolds died on Friday at the age of 88. For nearly 4 decades, from 1960 to 1999, he was a staff member with the War Resisters League, where he focused on counter-recruitment and helped organize one of the first draft card burnings, and went on to play a key role in some of the major demonstrations against the Vietnam War. He also campaigned for nuclear disarmament. In 1980 and 2000, David McReynolds ran for president as an openly gay man on the Socialist Party USA ticket. We're going to turn now to a clip of a video made for his 80th birthday by his friend Anthony Giacchino.
In high school at George Washington High, as a student, I was fascinated by current events, and I followed the war with enthusiasm, with fascination, the map showing the Russian retreat or advance where the Allied forces were. And I remember 2 headlines. One of them was 1,000 bombers make hamburger of Hamburg, and another was 800 bombers blast Bremen. Germany had been so devastated that they couldn't cover all the damage. So then in 1951, I'm walking through Germany, and at first my reactions are entirely politically correct. I'm looking at the destruction and realizing this was the result of the capitalist drive for power, that the working class suffered the most, which is true, that the large business corporate structure was back in business. But it was seeing Bremen, seeing the damage, realizing I was the kid who had been so enthusiastic about the bombs falling, and then seeing the chaos the bombs had caused. I really had a profound, genuine religious experience. And I went up to an old lady, and then I pointed at the ruins, and I said, I'm sorry, and I broke down. The nature of violence and war embraces both sides. It embraces both the Nazis and what we did during World War II. And it was the point at which I really had an insight into war. I was the one who had dropped the bombs.
That was David McReynolds. He died Friday at the age of 88. For more, we continue our conversation with 2 of David's longtime friends here in New York. Ed Hedeman, who is a close friend of David McReynolds starting in the 70s. The 2 worked together for decades at the War Resisters League on counter-recruitment and disarmament campaigns. Ed is the author of the War Resisters League Organizer's Manual, also their book, War Tax Resistance, A Guide to Withholding Your Support from the Military. In '82, he co-founded the National War Tax Resistance Coordinating Committee, which still exists today. And joining us by Democracy Now! Video stream, Jeremy Scahill, investigative journalist, co-founder of The Intercept, author of the books Blackwater, The Rise of the World's Most Powerful Mercenary Army, Dirty Wars, The World is a Battlefield, as well as the Oscar-nominated film by that name. We welcome you both to continue this conversation. There you have David McReynolds talking about pacifism and what it meant to him, because he originally was fully for the bombing as a very young man in Nazi Germany.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that changed him. But it was that transition period from about 1949, 1951 that he was profoundly moved by the destruction of war and was an active campaigner. Well, he was quite an organizer even before that in other issues like the Prohibition Party. He was a member of that, but then left. And Socialist Party, War Resisters League, anti-nuclear politics.
David McReynolds was a longtime member of the Socialist Party. He ran for Congress when, Ed?
He ran for Congress in 1968 as a member of the Peace and Freedom Party that Eldridge Cleaver, I believe, was heading the ticket.
Mm. And he also ran for president in 1980 and 2000 on the Socialist Party USA ticket. Yes. As an openly gay candidate for U.S. Senate, he ran in 2004 on the Green Party ticket.
Yes.
This is David McReynolds talking about how he first became a socialist when he was a student.
I came into the Socialist Party partly because of poets like Kenneth Patchen, who were very powerful in their poems. No man can own what belongs to all. No man can lie when all are lied to. I also became a socialist when my economics class, which is a good professor, explained that 3% unemployment was the lowest you could expect under capitalism, and that was necessary. And I thought 3% unemployment was too high, but I became a socialist because it struck me that capitalism was a lousy system. Among other things, it made my father work as an advertising man when he would have been much better off doing something else. He would have preferred to be a minister. He was a devout Christian. He was a salesman because he had to put bread on the table for the family, and it didn't do good things for him. To see what the system had done to him, what it had done to so many people, most of the work that people do is pointless work, and they do it because they must earn a living to provide food. And I want a society where the people are more able to work and work hard, but at jobs that they enjoy and that make a contribution to the world around them. And we don't live in that kind of society. That's
another clip from a video made for David McReynolds' 80th birthday by his friend Anthony Giacchino. Jeremy, as you listen to David speaking, we are also watching him in his apartment talk about both his philosophy and knowing him in his Lower East Side apartment.
Well, I remember when my friend Carmen Trotta, I guess it would have been in 1996, invited me to go over to David McReynolds' apartment on the Lower East Side of New York for an evening of, he just invited, David would do this all the time. I'm sure Ed has been at these gatherings many, many times. He would invite a kind of eclectic, interesting collection of people. And, you know, libations would be consumed, both drinking them and smoking them. And David's house was filled with records and photographs and papers and papers and papers. And, you know, he still was using at times a typewriter or a word processor, although he later became, you know, a very tenacious correspondent, operating a number of listservs on various progressive causes and always trying to connect people. And, you know, he also was an old-fashioned guy. As I said, he loved records. He was a music aficionado. He also was old school. He would make his own seltzer water with the, you know, he would buy the little canisters, and he wasn't using SodaStream or any, you know, Israeli apartheid goods. And you would sit there and you know, David loved to both facilitate serious discussion, but then also interject with something incredibly witty or funny. He was a master, and it's very difficult for people to do this, of using sarcasm not at the expense of the smaller people. David definitely employed sarcasm as a way of punching up at the powerful. And, you know, I think Ed and I would both be remiss if we didn't mention that David had this incredible artistic eye. He was a really beautiful amateur photographer, both of movements, but also of nature. I still have a photograph that David took of this flower, this bright red flower that had somehow emerged out of the rubble of a, you know, industrial scene in New York City. I mean, this was a guy who loved people, loved life, but also knew that if the authoritarians take your ability to laugh, including at them, away, then they win. And that's one of the sort of things about David that I'll always cherish, is that he was funny. He was real. He was a human. He was a guy who would say, my political philosophy is not perfect. Every political philosophy has holes in it. He considered himself an ongoing student. And that's what I saw the last time I met with him, where I was invited, you know, to sort of give a report about Yemen. That was what he was spending his last moments in this world working on, was the latest horrid U.S. genocidal war.
Can you add to that, Ed?
Yeah, well, I'd like to emphasize his photography. I mean, he really was a photographer his entire life, from the 1950s up until, well, when he was still able to take photographs. He has a terrific collection, which there are few of his photos are up at McReynoldsphotography.org, and the New York Times obit had mentioned. But He had some terrific pictures from the 1950s of historic people: Martin Luther King, Bayard Rustin, Rosa Parks, Jane Mansfield. And David was a cook, too. I mean, he was a terrific cook. He not only the seltzer, but he was famous for his hummus with a lot of garlic in it. But he did a lot of terrific stuff in that regard. He was also a longtime member of the Bromeliad Society. And a key thing is he loved animals. He absolutely loved animals. Cats were the most important thing to him. He usually had about 2 cats with him at all times. It's shaman who had died just shortly after David was taken out.
And just to explain that,
yeah.
David injected shaman twice a day. She was diabetic.
He was diabetic.
He was diabetic.
Yeah, twice a day with insulin, yes.
Mm-hmm. And so because David fell, and it's not clear how many days he laid on the ground in his apartment before he was discovered, shaman had not been injected.
No, shaman had not been injected. We don't know for how long. Shaman was alive when David was discovered and seemed to perk up and was injected with insulin at that point and thought he would live. He did not. Peggy Solomon was his other cat who died, I think, a couple years ago. So Peggy Solomon and shaman were the 2 companions that he had for many years.
So David was a photographer, and he was also a poet. Can you read from this poem that he wrote for the massive War is Over demonstration in New York's Central Park on May 11th, 1975?
Yes, he said, "Hey, to happy hell today, with all hard politics, peddle the revolution tomorrow. The correct line this hour is joy. Stick a flower in your Memeo machine or give it to the cop. Smoke it up, drink it up, and damn it, laugh. We earned it 10 years after marchings, beatings, jailings, trapped in jails, armies, all-night meetings. And for God's sake, don't worry about being serious. We've a lifetime ahead, rocky tumbles coming, fords to cross, Kissinger goodbye, armies to disarm, banks to throw open, jails to tear down. Tomorrow is time enough. We've got a good life of work standing right ahead. But take this day off, miss the cell meeting tonight, skip the speaker who will explain it all, and take a friend to bed instead. This was the end of the beginning. Tonight is the party time all over town."
And he read that at the big War is Over protest.
Well, I don't remember if he read it because I was out of town when that happened, so I missed it. But he produced this leaflet. I mean, the War Resistance League produced this leaflet to hand out there, and it was handed out by the thousands.
David McReynolds was extremely creative, Jeremy, and you spent time in his apartment.
Yeah, I mean, he, as Ed is reading that poem, I mean, it could have been written by David a couple of years ago, not decades ago, because that was still the spirit that he brought with him. And he, as he got older, he was very in touch with his frailty and his, inability to operate as he did. I mean, remember, he retired. Ed would know exactly, but I think in 1999 he retired. Yeah. And yet, even in his retirement, ran for president, and then continued showing up, which of course was the primary thing that activists believe is necessary. You have to be there with your body. David continued to show up even in poor health and continued to organize. But I think Ed is right, and I'm trying to also to emphasize that David was not some stern sectarian who had no joy in his life. David was a guy who, in fact, loved life so much that he wanted to spend it fighting for a more just world. And enjoying food, enjoying music, enjoying animals, enjoying company of friends. All of that is part of being a revolutionary. And I love that in that poem, David is talking about laughing and is talking about making love and is talking about being with friends and taking time off from all of this misery that the authoritarians are raining down upon us in the world, because he knew at the end of the day, what is the whole point of our struggle? It's so that people can have peace in their lives. And what does it mean to have peace in your lives? It means that you have joy in your life. It means you have the company of others in your life. It means that you're secure in knowing that you can walk down the street without being blown up. That was what his whole life was about fighting for. And it was sort of consistent with the resistance that he also knew how to enjoy the good stuff in life.
I wanted to play a few more clips of David in his own words. This is David McReynolds describing his work with the War Resisters League, where he worked from 1960 to 1999.
The longest job I ever had was working for the War Resisters League from 1960 to 1999. And my job changed over the years from being field secretary to being, in a sense, the spokesperson for the League. To be a war resistor means to challenge the institution of war and to resist all wars, defensive or aggressive, even at the cost of going to prison or at the risk of your life. Now, whether I would be willing to risk my life, I don't know. Would I be willing to risk going to prison? Yes, I would. So to be a war resistor means to view war itself as a crime against humanity, not the soldiers who are engaged in the fighting. They're trapped by the structure. In the Vietnam War, it was clear that to the degree that you can say one side is right and one side is wrong, it was clear the Vietnamese were right. But that doesn't mean for a moment that I would buy weapons for the Vietnamese. My job during the Vietnam War was to get the Americans out of Vietnam. It wasn't to decide how the Vietnamese were going to wage their own struggle. So we resisted that war actively and organized to do everything we could to slow down and impede the American war machine.
So that was David McReynolds in a video for his 80th birthday done by his friend Anthony Giacchino. A lot of people may not know what the War Resisters League is, Ed Hedeman. You worked with him for decades at the WRL. Explain the work you did together.
Yeah, well, mostly my role was as an organizer for issues like disarmament, counter-recruitment, local organizing, and I would work with the people in the communities and help produce materials. David was the one who churned out a lot of flyers and analysis that would be used by local organizers. He went around the country to speak from time to time, and he participated in organizing demonstrations. We had a large demonstration in 1976, the bicentennial of the U.S., where we had a walk called the Continental Walk for Disarmament and Social Justice. It went across the country from California to Washington, D.C., had a lot of different routes, took 9 months to do this entire thing. David was essential in networking with organizations that he knew, whether that be the AFSC, Fellowship of Reconciliation, or the Southern Christian Leadership Conference in the South. He was very good at making those contacts and would help produce position papers for that. So that's the sort of thing that he would do very well. He also came up with ideas for demonstrations and that we helped carry out in our respective capacities.
And overall, the War Resisters League founded to...
Well, it was founded in 1923 in the aftermath of World War I. There was a concern that the only way to stop wars, this is in 1923, was for men who were the ones who were doing the fighting to refuse to participate in the next war and to register and sign up as many people as possible who would say, I am not going to fight. It didn't work out, but that was the basic concept, and a lot of people joined, and War Resisters League helped organize demonstrations in the 1930s, no more war parades and so forth. And it was also a secular organization because up to that point, most of the organizations had a religious basis. And War Resisters League organizers, people who started at Jesse Wallace Hewin being the key founder, John Hayes Holmes, and a number of others, they were concerned. There were a lot of socialists who didn't have a religious affiliation, of anarchists and others who believed in nonviolent solution rather than bombing people, and they felt sort of left out of the religious organization. So the War Resisters League was an offshoot of Fellowship of Reconciliation, a religious organization, and to try to be a home for all people, whether they were religious or not. And it built up throughout the 20s, 30s, 40s, and especially after World War II, a lot of resistors got out of prison, people who refused to participate in World War II and had been sent to jail. And they broadened the scope of the War Resisters League to focus not only on opposing wars, but causes of war, which was a part of War Resisters League founding. But they wanted to do more demonstrations in the street, civil disobedience, work on civil rights issues in the 50s, 60s, banned the bomb movements. So the WO really ramped up its street actions and street organizing, especially in the 60s and 70s.
Now, as you've said, you got, under Freedom of Information Act, a lot of documents of surveillance of the War Resisters League, and in that of hundreds of pages on David McReynolds.
Yes. Well, this is back in mid-1970s, where there was a lot of, well, the FOIA had passed a few years earlier, and then people were saying, okay, well, I'm going to go get my FBI files. And we did it for the organization. Everybody on WL staff also applied and got their files, heavily redacted at points. But the most interesting ones, at least to me, were the ones on the War Resisters League, where the COINTELPRO of the FBI sought to disrupt the movement.
This is the counterintelligence program.
Counterintelligence program of the FBI. The whole purpose of it was to disrupt the movement, the anti-war movement, the civil rights movement, any other movement of leftists, communists, socialists, so forth.
Also certainly went after the Black Panthers, and many were killed, assassinated.
No, absolutely. I mean, this is all part of COINTELPRO. But then we got these documents where we saw that they made up these flyers. I mean, these outrageous flyers with stupid language, I mean, really childish language that we never would have ever used. And, you know, they approved it. I mean, I was amazed that they went out and say that they put in the profanity and vulgarity because that was all part of the movement. It's, you know, it's like we swore every time we opened our mouths. And yeah. So
you got thousands of pages from the FBI.
Yes.
And hundreds were on David McReynolds? Yes.
Well, David applied for his own FBI files. I mean, you had to give your Social Security number and prove that you were, you know, David McReynolds, that he had to prove who he was. It wasn't just somebody else trying to get this information. But so he applied for his and got over 400 pages. I applied for myself. I forgot what I got, but initially I got 50 pages. Then I said, "Oh, what about such and such?" And I got a few more pages. And every time I went back, I got more pages. And it wasn't just the FBI, but it was the IRS, the CIA, the Naval Intelligence. I mean, all these different branches had files on the War Resisters League and on David, of course. But mostly it was reporting on what we were doing. And they had they rated people too. Like revolutionary threat or something like that. And they had people at different threat levels such that if an emergency happened, depending on the threat level, certain people would be rounded up. It was never implemented. But
so this was decades ago that David applied for his...
Yes, in the mid-'70s.
And so that means there might have been a lot more that he didn't have a record of.
I'm sure there's a lot more.
Did he ever feel that he was followed?
I think he didn't care. I mean, his style of organizing and that of the War Resisters League was basically being open. We weren't afraid to say what we were doing. We weren't trying to hide it. We were trying to advertise. We wanted people to know. We had nothing to hide. So, you know, it's a little bit annoying, but we had nothing to hide and it didn't bother us. We didn't waste our time worrying about it.
And the role of A.J. Musty and Bayard Rustin?
Yeah, well, Bayard Rustin was someone who influenced David very early on. He mentioned in that video that it was 1949 that he heard him speak and was profoundly influenced by him.
Bayard Rustin, the Black Pacifist organizer of the 1963 march.
Who had been a member of the Fellowship of Reconciliation as well as War Resisters League, and A.J. Musty, who was sort of the dean of the peace movement at that point in the 40s and 50s and certainly 60s, because Musty was respected by all sides. The peace movement wasn't one homogeneous thing that everybody agreed with everything. There was lots of fights, but everybody respected Musty, and Musty was able to hold together a lot of the different parts of the peace movement. And his analysis, David agreed with a lot. I mean, their political philosophy is very similar. So he had profound impact on David.
I wanted to go to two moments of video clips where David McReynolds was running for president. This first one was running in the 2000 election for president on the Socialist Party ticket, and talking about particularly what effect he might have had on Florida.
There are people who voted for me because they wanted to, but Someone could argue that by running on the Florida ballot, the number of votes I got tipped the election to Bush. And granted, the same thing could have been said about the other three candidates, but I think that's in some ways an unfair question, because the real question in my mind is why Gore did not ask for a recount in the whole state.
Well, that's interesting. David McReynolds, that's from the video that Anthony Giacchino did for his 80th birthday. But Ed, can you comment on this, right? He ran on the Socialist Party ticket. 2000, of course, is Bush v. Gore.
I can't comment any more than what was said. I mean, he was, Florida was a key state, and there was a lot of these hanging chads. And so they kept, the news kept looking at these hanging chads. It just happened that the position of the Socialist Party ticket, David, was right close by. So the Socialist Party and his running were on the news a lot, just by accident.
So now let's go to 2004, when he was running for Senate on the Green Party ticket and was asked about Senator Chuck Schumer's opposition to gay marriage.
I think it is really outrageous for Schumer, particularly in a city which has a large gay and lesbian population, to come out against gay marriage. I really think this is contemptible on his part. And I also don't know, although that's not nearly as important in my mind as the issue of killing people and being killed in Iraq. I don't understand why gays and lesbians shouldn't suffer from the same angst, anxiety, tribulations, and trials of marriage which, heterosexuals have to go through. Why should we be exempt from these problems? So that's a fake issue, but Schumer has dodged that issue along with many others, and I think people should cast a strong protest vote against Chuck Schumer.
So we're going to leave it there in Dave McReynolds' own words. And I want to thank our guests today, Ed Hedeman, longtime colleague and friend of Dave McReynolds at the War Resisters League, and Jeremy Scahill, investigative journalist, co-founder of The Intercept. Both knew Dave McReynolds for decades. To see part one of our discussion, you can go to democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. Thanks so much for joining us.